Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be painting up a classic Beast of Nurgle. I got a bunch of these from when Games Workshop decided to resell them. And these were metal when I first painted them up. And this one is Finecast. My day is ruined, my disappointment is immeasurable. So, since we're going with an old school model, I used an old school technique. Green putty. So basically what I did was just apply some green putty in these very giant and obvious cracks in the model. And then I used a rubber brush and some water to help smooth them in to blend it into the background. And it kind of worked, give or take. And once fully assembled, we're going to prime it with Bright Touch General Purpose Gray Car Primer. Now while that is drying, I'm going to go with Liquitex Modeling Putty. I'm going to apply it all over the base. Make sure it's flattened and stuff. I'm going to rapidly dry the top with a hair dryer so it becomes pliable and not sticky. And flatten it up a little bit, add some grooves and stuff, and make it a little textured. And now for the pre-coating. With Wah Flesh and Pallid Witch Flesh, I'm going to paint it. So I already painted it with Wah Flesh, and now this is me with an airbrush pointing down, creating the light so it's shadows. I wanted this to be like a sickly white Beast of Nurgle. And so I wanted a dark green base and white on top, and then adding details onto it. I then go with White Scar White, and then I dry brush all over. The white wasn't as noticeable at first, so I decided to go and dry brush this to pick out all the little minutiae and details. Now with Viridian Hue and Lamp Black oil colors, and then I'm going to get some mineral spirits, mix it and create a wash. So I have this darkish green, and I'm going to apply this wash all over the model. Now I do not actually use a hair dryer for this because the way the model is, it's like the paint could easily flow out, so I let it dry naturally for like an hour because I forgot about it. And then I went with my makeup sponge, and then I wiped stuff away. A little rough, but you want to do it sooner. And so then once that was done, I then saw I was like, maybe I need to dry brush a little more. And so I took my dry brush and reapplied some White Scar White dry brush all over. And it looks pretty okay. Now with Skeleton Horde Contrast and Lamian Medium, I mix them two together to dilute the Skeleton Horde, and also so that it flows better. That's one other reason to add Lamian Medium. Even if you want the strong color, just add a little bit, helps it like flow better onto the model. And I apply this on the scales, the back of the slug part, and some other things. I do around 2 coats-ish. Better to do 2 coats than one very thick coat that's too strong. And this is just to add a little bit of differentiating color. And now with Golem Flesh and Lamian Medium, mixed together for the same reasons, I then apply it to his head tentacle things. I do around 2 or 3 coats. It depends on how diluted the Golem Flesh is with Lamian. And also make sure it doesn't pull too heavily in the recesses between coats, otherwise you're going to have a mess. And then with the finest camera angles, I do another layer of dry brushing with White Scar White. And now with Cadian Fleshtone, Fire Slayer Flesh, and Lamian Medium, we're going to paint his tongue and like this little flesh bits that are around his mouth. So we're going to start with Cadian Fleshtone. Then we're going to have Fire Slayer's Flesh diluted with some Lamian Medium, and then we're going to apply a layer of it. And now here's essentially what we're going to do. We're then going to highlight the bits of flesh and his tongue with Cadian Fleshtone, and then once it dries, Fire Slayer Flesh, Cadian Fleshtone, we're going to do back and forth a few layers, and I'm just going to basically paint lines on his tongue to create texture. So I do this like 3, maybe 4 times. It depends. Like for you, it depends on how diluted the Fire Slayer flesh is. The Fire Slayer flesh is a reddish brown, and so I thought it would fit. And then I keep doing it until I get the result I like. Alright, with Thondia Brown, Karak Stone, and Ushtabi Bone, we're going to paint his nails. Now, this didn't turn out so well initially, so I painted the whole thing with Thondia Brown, all the nails. Then I went and applied a layer of Karak Stone, but the contrast between the 2 colors was so big, I was thinking of doing a transition from brown to light, and then do lines between, but that was terrible. So basically what I did was I did a mix of Thondia Brown, then did a mix of Thondia and Karak to be in between, then Karak, then a mix of Karak and Ushtabi towards the tip and stuff, and then pure Ushtabi on the tip. And then once that was done, I then took a fine brush and Karak Stone and painted lines all along the nail from the dark brown part up, and then on the upper tip part I then drew lines with the Ushtabi bone. And so that created this, and so like the lines actually kind of helped hide the hard transitions of colors, even though I did mixes of the colors to make them transition better, and it looked okay. Alright, with Skeleton Horde Contrast, Karak Stone, and Ushabti Bone, we're going to paint his horns and teeth coming out of his mouth. And so I do use a little bit of Lava with the Skeleton Horde Contrast to dilute it a bit, but it's a little too much. So first I paint off the teeth and everything with Karak Stone. Then I apply Skeleton Horde Contrast diluted a bit onto the horns. Then I reapply Karak Stone as a highlight. Then I do Skeleton Horde. Then I do Karak Stone again as a further highlight, and then I do Ushtabi Bone as a very fine highlight. With Bestigor Flesh, Anthonian Camo Shade, and Gulliman Flesh, we're going to paint a few details. So he has boils everywhere, so I'm going to do what I used to do. So I'm going to apply Bestigor Flesh, apply a wash, and then redo Bestigor Flesh on top as a tip to create like a little nice boil. And the only reason I'm using Anthonian Camo Shade is because I wanted to do like he's sickly white with some green hints. And so this adds to that. And then once that's done with Gulliman Flesh, I'm just going to paint it around where I think his eyes are, but it really doesn't seem to do anything because his face is like just a bunch of flesh. Alright, with Pallid Witch Flesh, we're going to add another layer onto the model to add some more of the whiteness back. But I'm going to do overbrushing, which is very similar to dry brushing, but not. And essentially this is onto his back or the most plain areas and stuff, and I do take a little bit of the pure Pallid Witch Flesh with a brush and apply it to his like big spine thingies on his back, just to make them solid color, because solid colors is pretty important. And then with AK Interactive Ultra Matte Varnish, we're going to apply this all over the model. And then with Liquitex Gloss Varnish, we're going to apply this onto his tongue and mouth and the skin bits around there. I then assemble the model onto the base that is painted in my usual style. I then take Uriel Yellow and Nurgle's Rot and mix them together to create this very light yellowish sludge, and then I apply it all over the base because this is for my personal army and this is what they all have in their base, and I apply small dots of this yellowish Nurgle's Rot onto the tip of his tail and the head tentacles he has. Now I'd like to point out that my Nurgle's Rot is different than what everyone else can get because when I first got it, it was too dark of a green, so I mixed in a yellow ink into it and it has changed the color and texture and all that stuff. So I added Uriel Yellow, and I did have to add a little bit of Lamian Medium to make it flow better, and then a little bit of water to make it flow better. So just FYI. And we are done. How did he turn blue? That's what I don't get. How did he turn blue? His skin is bluish. Yeah, I used green on him, a dark green oil wash, and that turned him green, and now he's blue. How'd that happen? Alright, whatever. So I would technically call this a failure, but I have painted blue Nurgling and red Nurgling before on some previous Nurgle kits for my army. So, with that out of the way, this model becomes very difficult to rate properly because I have 3 of these. I'm going to paint 2 others in different styles later, or trying to get it white the next time, but essentially, the models are filled with a lot of oddities from the casting process, and a lot of the details are really hard to get uniform. Like, I'm really seeing the difference between the past GW and the current GW when it comes to painting models, is because a lot of the detail and stuff to paint there may or may not exist on certain models. Like, the exact same model, it's just a different cast print, and there's a lot of randomness with it, and it's actually kind of hard to bring out a lot of the detail because it's like super thin, fine lines that are not regular. It's like, I can't really make much detail there when it's sort of an amalgamation of parts and stuff. It looks weird, it's odd. So it was actually very difficult for me to paint. It's more like a bunch of colors mixed on this really messy canvas. It's like, where was his eyes? How's like the back of his sluggishness or slug part and stuff? It's like, there's a lot of fine minute details that the dry brushing was able to bring out, but it was really hard to make like a masterpiece out of this, or like I had to create my own detail or make stuff up for it. So yeah, that was an interesting and tough model to paint. So I'm gonna just say an 8 out of 10 because even though technically I failed to do my original color scheme, he's bluish, but I was so surprised at like how difficult it was to paint him. Because I know that the model one, a lot of the parts were a lot more robust, more thicker. Like, painting lines on him would have been much easier if he was metal for some reason. Because I remember the previous one not being this hard. But wow, so I did what I could. He looks great. I mean, I get, yeah, for the color scheme and stuff, but like, he will always be an amalgamation of mess of flesh, which is the old Nurgle that I used to love. So it's a mixed bag, but anyway, more to come. So like the video if you like the video, share it if you want to share it, comment if you want to comment, and more to come relatively soon because I'm only doing single models for a while. Bye.